They called him Killer until Obese girl he saved showed them the truth about his heart. Leave her! The deputy's shout cracked across Ravencrest's freight yard like a whip, but the mob only pressed closer, faces slick with rain and meanness. You heard the doc. She stole laudanum. Thieves don't get mercy. Miriam Thornfield lay against a wagon wheel, breath shivering, one sleeve torn and dark with blood where a bullet had grazed her shoulder. She was soft-bodied, mud-splashed, cheeks blotched from fever and shame, an easy target for men who wanted a story to tell over whiskey. Someone flicked a pebble that stung her forehead. Laughter tumbled after it. "Stand up, girl," the deputy crowed. "Show Ravencrest what a liar looks like. Said she needed medicine for her mother. Ain't got a mother, has she? Just an appetite and sticky fingers." Murmurs swelled. "Look at her," a woman sniffed. "Fat and pitiful. Always the ones who claim they're victims." A boy mimed her stagger, and the yard howled. Miriam tried to rise. Her legs quaked. She sat back hard, palms in the grit, blinking through rain and humiliation. "I'll pay," she rasped, voice a fray of thread. "I'll work off every drop, please." The deputy's smile went thin. "You'll pay by learning." He thumbed back the hammer on his pistol just to scare her, just enough to make the crowd gasp and feel powerful. That was when the freight yard went quiet, not politely, not gradually, quiet like a lantern blown out. A figure stepped from the wall of rain. He was broad as a barn door, brim dripping, coat black with weather, iron-gray hair roped at his nape, beard rough as pine bark, eyes the color of river stones after a storm. Ezekiel Blackwood. Zeke. The name rolled through the crowd like a bad wind. "The killer," someone whispered, delighted and afraid at once. The deputy lifted his pistol higher, bravado buckling. "You got no business here, Blackwood." Zeke's gaze traveled once across the circle of faces, unhurried. "You do this thing," he said, voice low and steady, "and you'll have to live with what it makes you." He looked down at Miriam without flinching from her blood or her body. "Can you stand?" She swallowed. No." It cost her to admit it. He set a burlap-wrapped parcel on the wagon tongue and loosened the twine. A glass bottle glimmered, the exact medicine she'd tried to buy and been denied. He held it up, then put a coin roll on top of the deputy's ledger with a clack that sounded like a verdict. "For the doctor, for the bullet you fired to frighten a starving woman, for the trouble you've made of your own soul." Rain hissed. No one moved. Zeke shrugged out of his coat, knelt, and slid an arm beneath Miriam's back. "Up you come," he murmured, lifting her as if she were made of breath and not of pain. She startled at his gentleness, at the careful way he kept his eyes on her face and nowhere else. Around them, Ravencrest held its breath. They called him Killer. Tonight, he carried a life. If this reached you wherever you are, tell me, from what city or country are you listening right now? Zeke carried her through the rain-drenched streets of Ravencrest without a word. The townsfolk parted like water around a stone, silent, watchful, whispering the same name that had haunted him for 10 years. The Killer. Every door he passed seemed to close a little faster, every window curtain twitched aside and then vanished. He didn't care. He had learned long ago that truth was a fragile thing in the mouths of frightened people. When he reached the edge of town, the cobblestone gave way to dirt. The trees swallowed him and the wounded woman in his arms. The sound of the town, its gossip, its malice, faded behind them, replaced by the hush of pine and the low groan of thunder rolling away. Miriam's head rested against his shoulder, her breath shallow but steady. She smelled faintly of wet linen and iron. Zeke's cabin lay a mile deeper in the woods, across a creek that glittered like cold steel. It was a long walk for a man who had once sworn never to carry another living soul into that place again. Yet here he was. When he reached the clearing, the old cabin came into view. Solid logs darkened by age, moss creeping up one side, a curl of smoke rising from the chimney. He kicked open the door and stepped inside. The room was simple: a hearth of stone, a heavy oak table, 2 chairs, a narrow bed pushed against the far wall. Everything smelled of cedar and ash. He laid her gently on the bed, then crouched beside her, his hand hovering over her wound. The bullet had grazed the shoulder, but left a deep tear. She needed cleaning and stitches. He took a steadying breath, forcing his hands not to tremble. When he touched her, she flinched and moaned softly. "You're safe," he murmured, not sure she could hear. "You're safe now." He fetched a basin, boiled water, and tore an old shirt into strips. The lamplight threw shadows over his face, sharp planes, hollow cheeks, the map of a man who had lived too long in silence. When he reached for the torn fabric of her dress, he hesitated. No one had been this close to him in years. Her pulse fluttered beneath his fingers, fragile as a bird's wing. He turned his face away, speaking low. "Forgive me, I have to clean this wound." He worked with careful precision, cleaning, stitching, wrapping. His touch was firm but reverent. When it was done, he covered her with his blanket and sat back in the chair beside her bed. Rain whispered against the roof. For the first time in years, the cabin no longer felt empty. Morning brought silence thick as wool. Zeke woke to the sound of soft breathing that wasn't his own. He turned his head and saw her awake. Miriam blinked at the ceiling, disoriented. Her lips were dry, and her voice came out rough. Where am I?" "You're in my cabin," Zeke said quietly. "You were shot. I found you near the creek." Her eyes darted toward him. When she saw his size, the scars on his hands, the gray in his beard, fear flickered in her gaze. "You're him," she whispered. "The one they call—" He didn't let her finish. "They call me many things. You can call me Zeke." She tried to sit up, winced, and sank back down. "Why did you help me?" He met her eyes, steady, unflinching. "Because no one else would." For a long moment, neither spoke. Firelight shimmered between them. Miriam's gaze drifted to the walls, lined with tools, a hunting rifle, and a shelf of dried herbs and jars labeled in neat handwriting. Everything was clean, orderly, almost tender. It didn't fit the image of a murderer's den. "You stitched me up," she said softly. "You changed my clothes?" Zeke's jaw tightened. "I did what was needed. I worked in the dark, with my eyes covered. You have my word." Her breath caught. She didn't know whether to believe him, but something in his tone, something that felt more like shame than defense, made her nod. "Thank you," she whispered. He looked away. "Rest now. The forest's quiet this morning, but storms come fast here. You'll need your strength." She closed her eyes again, exhaustion pulling her under. Zeke sat back, studying her face. Her features were soft, kind. He could almost see another woman's face there, rounder, laughing, gone. He exhaled and muttered under his breath, "I wasn't supposed to care again." But he already did. Outside, the first sunbeam broke through the mist, falling across the window and onto the bed, onto her face, onto his scarred hands. And for a brief moment, The mountain that had long been cursed with silence breathed again. For days, the cabin filled with the quiet rhythm of healing, the scrape of a chair, the murmur of boiling water, the soft rasp of Zeke's boots on the wooden floor. Outside, autumn burned itself down the mountainside, gold to copper, copper to ash. Inside, time was measured by the sound of her breathing growing stronger. When Miriam woke, she found soup steaming beside her bed, thick broth with venison and wild carrots. A note, written in rough, careful script, lay beside the bowl. Eat. You need strength. She smiled faintly. Even his handwriting was cautious, like a man afraid to take up too much space in the world. Later that morning, she heard him chopping wood outside. Through the small window, she could see his form moving among the trees. Broad shoulders, slow precision, each swing of the axe controlled, deliberate. He wasn't the monster they described. Monsters didn't stop to catch their breath before striking again, as if they were afraid to break the world. When he returned, his hands were covered in sawdust. "You're awake," he said. "Good. Eat something." "I did," she said. "It was good." A flicker of surprise crossed his face, so brief she almost missed it. "Haven't cooked for anyone in a long while." "You should do it more often," she said, and his lips almost curved, as if he'd forgotten how to smile. As the days passed, she grew stronger. Every morning, Zeke would help her sit up, then take her to the doorway so she could feel the wind and sunlight. He never touched her more than necessary, just a hand at her elbow, steady, protective. At first, the silence between them was heavy. He wasn't a man of words, and she wasn't sure how to fill the quiet. But gradually, small things began to bridge the distance. When he brought her tea made from mountain mint, she said, "My mother used to brew this when I was sick." He nodded. "Helps the lungs. Grew some by the creek." She tilted her head. "You're not what they say." He paused by the fire, the log half split in his hands. "And what do they say?" "That you're dangerous, that you killed your family." The axe handle creaked under his grip. For a long moment, she thought he might explode, but instead he set the axe down slowly. "They needed a story to make sense of grief. I gave them one." His voice carried no anger, only exhaustion, the kind that sits deep in a man's bones. "I don't believe them," she said softly. Zeke didn't answer, but his jaw eased slightly, and when he looked at her again, his eyes were less guarded. Weeks turned into a quiet rhythm of survival. Zeke taught her to move carefully through the snow, to recognize animal tracks, to find water under ice. She helped him patch torn shirts, clean his rifles, and dry herbs for winter. One morning, she insisted on following him down to the creek. "I need to walk again," she said. "You'll fall," he warned. "Then you can catch me," she said, smiling. He sighed, but he stayed beside her as she took slow, trembling steps down the narrow path. When she stumbled, his hand caught her waist, firm but gentle. She looked up, breathless. Their faces were inches apart. "Careful," he murmured. "I told you you'd catch me," she whispered back. He stepped away first, pretending to adjust his grip on the bucket. "You talk too much." "You listen too much," she countered. That made him huff something dangerously close to a laugh. By the time they reached the creek, her legs were shaking, but she felt triumphant. The water rushed clear and cold beneath the frost, and Zeke crouched to fill the bucket. She crouched beside him, fingers grazing the icy edge. "Why stay here?" she asked. "You could go anywhere." He stared into the water for a long time before answering. "Because nowhere else would have me." She wanted to say I would, but she bit her tongue. Some wounds need silence before they can hear comfort. That evening, a storm rolled in. Fierce wind, heavy snow. The cabin shuddered under its weight. Zeke made sure the fire burned strong, then laid an extra quilt at the foot of her bed. When lightning cracked outside, she flinched. He looked over from the chair by the door. "You're safe," he said. "I know," she whispered, but her hands still trembled. After a long pause, he stood, crossed the room, and placed another log on the fire. "Rebecca used to hate storms," he said suddenly. "Rebecca?" He nodded once. "My wife." She waited, not wanting to push. He sat on the edge of the table, hands clasped loosely between his knees. "She'd sit there, just like you, afraid the roof would come down. I'd tell her the mountain holds stronger than the wind, but she'd laugh and say, 'Then I'll hold you.'" Miriam's chest tightened. "She must have loved you very much." "She did," he said, voice rough, "and I failed her." Before she could respond, thunder rumbled again, shaking the walls. Without thinking, she reached for his hand. He looked down at their joined fingers, then at her. "You don't have to be alone in storms," she said softly. He didn't pull away. The firelight danced across his face, tracing the lines of sorrow and strength. For the first time since he'd carried her out of the rain, she saw not the killer, not the recluse, but the man beneath, weary, scarred, human. The storm raged through the night, but inside the cabin glowed warm, and somewhere between thunder and dawn, the mountain whispered that two broken souls had begun to find their way back to life. The storm passed, leaving the world washed and silent. Snow blanketed the trees like cotton, the sky pale as breath. Inside the cabin, the fire burned low, filling the air with the scent of pine smoke and something gentler, the smell of bread baking. Miriam sat by the hearth, stirring a pot with clumsy determination. Her hands were still weak, and the spoon wobbled dangerously close to tipping over. "You're stirring too fast," Zeke rumbled from the corner, sharpening his knife. "I'm stirring just fine," she said, half defensive, half playful. "You're making it angry. Bread doesn't rise if it's offended." She turned, lips twitching. "Are you saying dough has feelings?" "Everything does if you listen long enough." She tried not to smile, but failed. "And what do you think mine is saying?" Zeke paused, eyes narrowing with that quiet intensity she had grown used to. "It's saying you're still trying to prove you belong here." The spoon stopped. He wasn't wrong. Every morning she woke early to clean, to sew, to work, anything to make herself useful. But part of her still feared he might one day decide she'd had enough rest and send her away. "I'm trying to be helpful," she murmured. "You already are," he said, softer now. "You just haven't learned to believe it." Her heart stuttered at that. She turned back to the pot before he could see the tears forming in her eyes. The days fell into rhythm. Dawn chores, mid-morning tea, repairs, and quiet evenings by the fire. There was comfort in their small routines. Zeke split wood outside while she mended the torn curtains. He built a bird feeder by the window. She painted it with crushed berries until it glowed red against the snow. Sometimes they worked in silence. Sometimes they spoke. Their words were few, but they carried warmth. At night, she read aloud from an old Bible left by his wife. He didn't say the words were painful to hear, but she could see it in the way his hands clenched and relaxed on his knees. One evening, when her voice grew hoarse, she stopped mid-verse. "Do you want me to stop?" He shook his head. "No. Keep reading. It sounds different when you do it." "Softer?" She smiled faintly. "Rebecca used to read to you, didn't she?" His jaw tightened. "Yes. Every night before the baby was due." The silence that followed was heavy, but not unbearable. She reached out and laid a hand on his. "I can stop if it hurts." He looked at her hand, then back at the fire. "Hurting's not the same as wishing it gone." So she kept reading. Weeks turned to months. The snow deepened, and so did their bond. Zeke began teaching her small things: how to snare rabbits, how to find north by moss, how to set traps for foxes without cruelty. She listened, eager, though her hands often fumbled. When she failed, he only said, "Try again." One afternoon, as she was hauling water from the creek, her boot slipped. She gasped, flailing, and he was there instantly, arms around her waist, catching her before she could fall. For a moment, their faces were inches apart, her breath fogging his beard. His hands lingered just a second too long on her hips before he stepped back. "You're reckless," he said gruffly. "You're fast," she replied, smiling. He grunted, but his ears reddened. Later that evening, she caught him carving something small from a block of wood. When she asked what it was, he muttered, "Nothing." But she saw the curve of a face forming, soft, round, familiar. That night, a fierce wind blew down from the ridge. The shutters rattled, snow hissed against the door. Inside, the cabin glowed golden from the fire. Zeke handed her a mug of tea and sat across from her, his eyes reflecting the flames. "You're not afraid of the mountain anymore," he said. She looked toward the window, where snow danced like ghosts. "I was at first, but it's quieter than the world below. Kinder, too." He nodded slowly. "The world down there isn't built for kindness." "Then why stay up here?" she asked. "Why live alone in a place that reminds you of everything you lost?" He didn't answer right away. His gaze drifted to the carved wooden figure resting on the mantel, a woman holding a child. "Because the mountain doesn't lie," he said finally. "People do." She studied him, the scars along his knuckles, the hollowness beneath his eyes, the strength that came from more than muscle. "Not all people," she said quietly. He looked at her, really looked, and something in his chest shifted. "Maybe not." Spring crept slowly over the ridge. Snow melted into streams, and patches of green began to show through. Miriam planted wildflowers behind the cabin, small, stubborn blooms that fought their way through the frost. When Zeke asked why she bothered, she said, "Because beauty deserves a place, even here." He didn't argue. Sometimes when she caught him watching her, his gaze soft, unreadable, she felt her pulse quicken. There was a gravity to him, something that pulled her closer without words. Yet he never crossed that fragile distance, until one evening in late March. She was at the stove, humming softly while stirring stew. He sat nearby, carving in silence. The fire crackled, rain whispered outside. Everything felt impossibly peaceful. Then she turned too quickly, the hem of her dress catching the corner of the pot. Hot broth splashed onto her wrist. She hissed in pain. Before she could react, Zeke was on his feet, grabbing her hand and pulling it under cool water from the basin. "Hold still," he said sharply. "It's just a burn. Don't argue." He examined the red mark, his thumb brushing lightly over her skin. His face was close, his breath warm against her cheek. For a heartbeat, the world stopped moving. Their eyes met, hers wide, his unreadable. Then slowly, his hand tightened around hers. "You shouldn't have to hurt any more," he said, voice low. She swallowed hard. "You can't keep the world from hurting me, Zeke." "Maybe not," he murmured, "but I can keep it from touching you here." Her heart pounded in her chest. "And if I want to be touched?" He froze, the air between them electric, charged with everything they'd both been afraid to admit. "Mira," he said, the name rough on his tongue, the sound of something breaking and healing at once. She rose on her toes, closed the distance, and kissed him. It was hesitant at first, a whisper of contact, a question neither had dared ask. But then his hand came up to cradle her face, and she leaned into it, and the question became an answer. The fire popped, rain fell harder, and two lost souls found warmth in a world that had offered them none. Outside, spring waited at the door. Inside, love had already begun. The thaw came early that year, carrying whispers down from the valley, rumors, footsteps, and trouble. For weeks, Zeke had noticed signs, tracks too deep for deer, voices carried on the wind that didn't belong to the mountain. Someone was looking for them. He didn't tell Miriam right away. She'd been happier than he'd ever seen her, humming as she baked, planting new herbs by the window, laughing at the jays that tried to steal her breadcrumbs. There was a light in her now, one that had been missing the day he carried her out of the woods. He couldn't bring himself to dim it yet, but one morning, when he returned from checking his traps, he found her standing by the door, clutching a folded sheet of paper. "Zeke," she said, her voice unsteady. This was nailed to a tree near the creek. He took the paper from her. It was damp from the fog, but the letters were clear. Wanted, Miriam Thornfield, runaway, daughter of Elias Thornfield. Reward for her safe return, $500. His jaw tightened. "They found out you're alive." She nodded slowly, fear flickering behind her eyes. "They won't stop until they drag me back." He folded the paper once, then again, until it disappeared into his palm. "They'll have to come through me first." "Zeke, please," she said. "You don't understand what he's capable of." He met her gaze. "You don't understand what I'm capable of when someone threatens you." Her breath caught. She knew that look. Calm, cold, the same one that had made an armed deputy drop his pistol months ago. That night, neither of them slept. The mountain that had always protected them now felt smaller, closer, almost watchful. Miriam sat by the fire staring into the flames. "You think they'll really come?" "They will," he said. "Men who put a price on someone don't just want them back. They want to prove they own them." She turned to him. "You don't have to fight for me." His expression softened. "You think I can stand by and let them take you?" "You've already done enough," she whispered. "You saved me. You gave me a life. I won't let them destroy yours." Zeke leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. "Mira, when I lost my wife, I thought God had taken everything I was meant to protect. When I found you, I realized he was giving me another chance." Her eyes welled. "Then promise me something," she said. "Promise me if it comes to it, if you have to choose, you'll live." He reached out, cupping her face. "No," he said quietly. If I have to choose, I'll fight, because living without you isn't living. 2 days later, trouble arrived. It started with dogs, their barking echoing through the woods before dawn. Zeke had been splitting wood when he heard it. He dropped the axe, grabbed his rifle, and moved to the window. Through the trees he saw movement, lanterns bobbing like fireflies in the mist. Voices shouted orders. "Elias Thornfield!" someone called. "Come out, girl! You're coming home!" Miriam's face went pale. My father. Zeke chambered around, eyes narrowing. "Get inside. Stay low." She hesitated. "Zeke, do as I say." He stepped out into the clearing, boots sinking into the thawed mud. 6 men advanced up the trail, rifles slung, dogs straining at their leashes. At their head was Elias Thornfield, tall and sharp as an axe handle, his gray beard trimmed to cruelty. "Well," Elias drawled, his voice dripping disdain. The rumors were true. The killer of Ravencrest himself, harboring my daughter. Quite a pair you make. "She's not yours to command any more," Zeke said evenly. Elias laughed. "Everything that bears my name belongs to me. The girl, the clothes on her back, even her shame. I'll take her home, or I'll burn this mountain to get her." Zeke didn't raise his rifle yet, but his voice hardened. "You won't leave with her?" "Don't test me, murderer," Elias spat. "We all know what you did to your wife." Zeke's knuckles whitened on the gunstock. "You don't know a damn thing." "Then tell me," Elias sneered. "Tell me how a woman and a child ended up in the ground while you lived." Miriam stepped onto the porch before Zeke could stop her. "Stop it!" she cried. "He didn't kill anyone. His wife died because no one in this cursed town would help her, just like no one helped me." Her father's face twisted. "You think this animal saved you? He's ruined you. I'll drag you back and lock you up until you remember how to behave like a lady." He lunged forward, but Zeke moved faster. The butt of his rifle struck Elias square in the chest, sending him sprawling in the mud. The other men lifted their guns. "Don't," Zeke warned, voice like thunder. "You fire one shot and you'll never fire another." They hesitated. Something in his stance, in the way he stood between Miriam and the world, made them falter. Elias coughed, spitting blood into the snow. "You'll regret this, Blackwood. You'll hang for touching what's mine." Zeke leveled the rifle. "She's not yours. Not now. Not ever." For a moment, no one moved. Then, with a sneer, Elias raised a hand to his men. "We'll be back with lawmen and torches. The town will burn you out, both of you." They retreated, vanishing into the trees, leaving behind the echo of their threats. Miriam ran to Zeke, gripping his arm. "You shouldn't have done that." He turned to her, eyes blazing. "You think I'd let them touch you?" Tears spilled down her cheeks. "Now they'll come for you again. They already think you're a murderer. This will prove it." He reached out, pulling her against his chest. "Then let them come," he said fiercely. "This time I won't hide from their lies." She clung to him, trembling. "I don't want to lose you, Zeke." He rested his chin on her hair, his heart heavy with a truth he hadn't spoken aloud in years. "You won't," he whispered, "not while I can still draw breath." Outside, the wind rose again, carrying the sound of distant dogs and the promise of another storm, not of weather, but of reckoning. The mountain had been patient with the world's cruelty long enough. Now it would fight back. By dusk, the mountain held its breath. The snow clouds thickened again, pressing low against the trees as if the sky itself wanted to witness what was coming. Inside the cabin, Zeke loaded his rifle in silence. Each click of the bolt echoed like a heartbeat. Miriam stood near the fire, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. "You don't have to face them alone," she said. He looked up, his expression carved from stone. "You're not stepping outside, Mira." "You can't stop me," she said softly. "This is my fight, too." His jaw clenched. "You don't understand what men like your father bring. They won't stop at words." She crossed the room, her voice trembling but firm. "And you don't understand what happens to a woman who runs her whole life. I'm done hiding, Zeke. If I'm ever to be free, it'll be because I stood beside you, not behind you." For a moment he wanted to argue, but something in her eyes silenced him. It wasn't fear he saw there anymore. It was resolve. "All right," he said quietly. "Then we stand together." They came just after midnight. 6 riders, torches burning through the fog, dogs snarling at their heels. At their head rode Elias Thornfield, his coat whipping in the wind, his hatred burning brighter than the fire he carried. "Blackwood," he roared, "you've got one last chance to hand her over." Zeke stepped out onto the porch, rifle in hand. "You came all this way to die on my land?" Elias laughed bitterly. "You can't hide behind that gun forever. The law's on my side. The town will thank me for ending your miserable life." "The law doesn't reach up here," Zeke said evenly. "The mountain decides who stays." Elias sneered. "You talk like you're God." "No," Zeke said, "but I've met him, and I've seen what he does to men like you." Behind him, Miriam appeared in the doorway. Her shawl fluttered in the wind, her face pale but calm. "Father, please," she said, "go home. I'm not your property. You can't own me." Elias's face twisted. "You ungrateful sow. I fed you, clothed you, and this is how you repay me? Running off with a murderer?" Zeke raised his rifle. "That's enough." But Elias was past reason. He swung his arm down. "Fire!" The world erupted. Gunfire cracked through the air. Torches tumbled into the snow, and dogs howled in chaos. Zeke dropped to one knee, firing twice. 2 men fell. Bullets tore into the porch rail. Splinters exploded. "Stay back!" he shouted to Miriam, but she was already moving, dragging the bucket from the hearth and throwing it across the burning woodpile where a torch had landed. Smoke curled up, choking the air. Zeke fired again, catching another man in the shoulder. A fourth tried to flank him, until Miriam, with shaking hands, raised the revolver Zeke had taught her to use and pulled the trigger. The man fell backward into the snow, his torch dying beside him. Elias froze at the sight of her, disbelief and fury twisting his face. "You'd point a gun at your own father?" Miriam's voice broke, but she didn't lower the weapon. "No, I'm pointing it at the man who stopped being my father the day he sold my freedom." Zeke rose slowly, blood streaking his sleeve from a graze. He walked toward Elias, step by deliberate step. "You brought this on yourself." Elias stumbled back, trying to reload, but his hand shook too much. "You'll hang for this, Blackwood." Zeke's voice was low and certain. "Not this time." The rifle thundered once. Elias fell to his knees, the torch slipping from his grasp. The snow hissed as the flame died. Silence swallowed the clearing, broken only by the hiss of melting snow and the soft sound of Miriam's sobs. She dropped the revolver and ran to Zeke. He caught her, holding her tightly, burying his face in her hair. "It's over," he murmured. "You're free." She shook her head against his chest. "We're free, both of us." Behind them, Dawn began to bleed through the trees, faint, gold, forgiving. The mountain, silent witness to years of pain and rumor, now stood washed clean by snow and fire. And as the light reached them, Zeke finally understood. He was no longer the killer of Ravencrest. He was simply a man redeemed by the courage of a woman the world had tried to break and the love she refused to surrender. The sun rose slow and pale over Ravencrest, glinting off the snow where blood had already turned dark and brittle. Smoke still drifted from the ruined torches, but the mountain was quiet again, a silence not of fear, but of peace. Miriam sat on the porch steps, wrapped in a wool blanket, the revolver still lying at her feet. Zeke knelt a few yards away, burying the bodies in the frozen earth. He didn't do it out of hatred or guilt, only out of duty. Every man, no matter how cruel, deserved to face the ground with dignity. When he was done, he stood in the new light, chest rising and falling with the cold air. His shirt was torn and blood-stained, his hands raw. But when he looked at Miriam, a faint smile touched his lips, tired but real. "It's finished," he said quietly. She rose, limping a little, and crossed the clearing. "You're hurt," she whispered. "I've had worse." She reached for his sleeve anyway, cleaning the blood with her shawl. "I thought I'd lost you again," she said, voice trembling. "You'll never lose me," he murmured, "not while I still have breath in my body." A week later, a wagon climbed the mountain road. The town sheriff, 2 deputies, and the local preacher. Zeke met them halfway down the trail, rifle slung, but hands open. "We heard the shooting," the sheriff said warily. "Your name's been on too many lips lately." Zeke told them the truth, every word, about Elias Thornfield's bounty, about the attack, about how it ended. He didn't beg, didn't threaten. He only spoke plain, the way honest men do. When he finished, the preacher stepped forward. "Ezekiel," he said softly, "we've done you wrong for years. You lost your family, and we let the lies bury you too." Zeke looked past him to the deputies, men who once crossed the street to avoid him. Their faces were heavy with shame. The sheriff nodded. "We'll tell the town what really happened. You've carried enough blame for 10 lifetimes." Zeke gave a single nod, neither forgiving nor condemning. "Just tell them she's safe," he said. Spring returned to the mountain, and with it, life. The graves that once marked sorrow now bloomed with wild flowers Miriam had planted, tiny bursts of color among the pines. The cabin walls gleamed from fresh timber, and smoke curled gently from the chimney. At night, they sat together by the fire, their hands entwined, the air humming with quiet contentment. "You ever think about leaving?" Miriam asked one evening, her head resting on his shoulder. "Sometimes," he said, "but then I remember—" "There's nowhere kinder than this mountain," she finished for him, smiling. He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "You make it kind." The flames crackled softly. She leaned closer, and the world outside faded. "You're safe here," he whispered. "It's your home now, if you'll have it." Miriam's eyes shimmered in the firelight. "I already do," she said. And as snow melted into rivers and the first robin sang through the valley, the mountain, once haunted by loss, kept its quiet promise. Love had come back to stay. Every time I tell a story like this, I'm reminded that love doesn't always arrive wearing silk and gold. Sometimes it comes wrapped in scars, silence, and second chances. Zeke and Miriam's mountain wasn't just a place, it was proof that even the most broken hearts can build a home from ashes. If you're still listening, I want to know, where in the world are you hearing this story from tonight? And if you still believe that love can heal what the world tries to destroy, stay with me. The next story will find you soon.